Welcome to episode 11 of the AI for Churches podcast. In today's episode, we'll be sharing some AI tools we've explored, including one that's apparently good at identifying bald people, and share what's new in AI that church leaders need to know about. And I recently sat down for a conversation with Barbara Carneiro, founder of Word Revolution, where we discussed the value of personas. Let's get started.
Welcome to the AI for Churches podcast. Our goal is to equip pastors and church leaders with resources related to artificial intelligence, helpful for sermon prep, creative ministries, outreach, and more. We do this by providing exclusive insights from AI experts, church leaders, and innovators actively leveraging AI to amplify the gospel and reach more people for Jesus Christ. Here are your hosts, Blair and Dr. David Thorne.
Well, hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the AI for Churches podcast. I am Blair, the sidekick for the mastermind of AI for Churches at Missional Marketing. Dr. David Thorne. David, welcome to another episode. Glad to spend some time with you today.
Yeah, good to see you, Bart.
We are going to talk a little bit about AI for Churches because that's what the purpose of this podcast is. We really want to help churches and church leaders understand the tools, the resources that they have at their fingertips, if they choose to put them at their fingertips, things that can aid them in ministry. A lot of people talk about AI, and we talked about this in our last episode. They think AI is just going to be used in churches for writing sermons. No. Hopefully we are dispelling that myth every time we get together and record. There's so much more that AI can do to help efficiencies in churches, whether it be creative or administrative, so many different things. You have your finger on the pulse of things that are going on in the AI world. And you shared some notes with me earlier. I took a look at them. It's kind of like reading a foreign language to me. I'm not really sure what all this is, but this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about some things that are going on in the AI world, and I want you to help us understand why these things matter to the local church. So David, tell us what's going on in the AI world and why it matters.
Yeah, there's something that recently happened that our good friends ChatGPT came out with that's called custom GPTs. And custom GPTs just burst on the scene, and it's almost all anyone can talk about right now.
Okay. Can you tell me what a GPT is? We use the word now. We use the terminology. I jokingly say it stands for God plus technology. God plus technology. That's why we should be using GPTs. But I know that's not true. What is a GPT?
It stands for generative pre-trained transformers.
Say that one more time.
Generative pre-trained transformers.
Okay.
Everyone listening,
not God plus technology. Okay. No. Okay.
I like that one better.
Okay.
It's a way to impress your friends at dinner tonight, impress your family, or bore them to death. Usually I bring this stuff up at dinner, and I get there's 4 other family members that sit with me at dinner, and I get 4 eye rolls and groans.
Does that include the dog? Does the dog roll his or her eyes?
I did not include the dog I meant human family members. The dog would. The dog would love me no matter what. So he probably is happy to hear me talk about generative pre-trained transformers.
Okay. Tell us what the significance is of ChatGPT announcing customized or custom GPTs. What does that actually mean?
Yeah. So when you typically go into ChatGPT, there's a prompt, and it just says, you tell it to do a thing. Well, that's great, but the ChatGPT is using all of the information that it knows up through the date of January 2022. Now, with custom GPTs, what you have the ability to do is you could go in and it says, what information do you want me to know about? And you say, okay, I want you to know about our website. Here are some facts and information that I want you to know when giving an answer. And you can just go to town on all the things that you want it to know. And once you hit save, that GPT will give answers inspired by and somewhat trained on the information that you put in And that's what we call like a custom GPT, or a GPT that is trained on a particular task or with particular information.
Give us an example of give us something simple. Keep it simple for the simpletons like me. What might I use a custom GPT for?
Sure. So here's on the custom GPT like list of custom GPTs that are out there in public. One of the ones that ChatGPT is promoting is called Santa. And it says, "I'm Santa, spreading cheer and helping with festive gift ideas." So somebody, it says by North Pole. So somebody, I'm guessing, is somebody who was bored at OpenAI, the parent company of ChatGPT, was bored one day and created this. So it's an expert at just suggesting gift ideas. A very simple task, but it happens to be trained and really, really good at giving gift ideas. One other one is a custom GPT that's trained on giving, explaining how to play board games. So you could mention any board game that it's been trained on, and it will spit out the directions right there of how to play that game. And you have the ability to ask it questions about playing that game.
So can you give an example of how a church might actually use a custom GPT?
Yeah. So for churches, the way that this could be helpful is it's more for internal related stuff. Like eventually OpenAI and ChatGPT will make these so you can put them places externally. But that's not the way that it is right this second. Right now, what these are useful for is somebody who has a paid ChatGPT subscription, which is about, I think it's $20 a month. You could go in and you can create your own custom GPT. So what you could do is you could give it maybe branding information about your church. You could give it the way, like upload and share things the way that your church says things, stuff that your church values. And then what you could do is jump in and maybe ask it to help you write a letter, an email, or write a text.
You could write a letter too, right? You could write a letter.
You could physically, you could have it help you write a letter. But you could possibly train a custom GPT on your church's voice. And I think that's one of the lower hanging fruits you could do, that asking it to help you to write things in a way that sound more like you. You could say there's here's 3 upcoming events. Help us to write the announcements. And you've taught it how to use your church's branding and voice. And so it could help write those announcements in a way that sounds like you.
Okay. That I think it would be very helpful. I know I was actually on a call with a church yesterday, and they were showing me their Christmas landing page, and they had used ChatGPT to write all of the copy that they had on their landing page to talk about their Christmas events and their Christmas services and things they were doing. And so if I had customized that GPT, I could feed it more information about my church, about the church culture, about the type of language we use. I haven't used one of these, so I really don't know how it works, but you're telling me I can kind of prompt it or shape it in a way so that when I give it prompts, it sounds more like my voice. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
I was playing around with creating one for missional marketing where I shared our website. I gave some insights about our products and things that missional marketing offers and does, and just played around with kind of asking it questions. It's one of those things where it's not at a place where we would use that, because it's mostly for me signing into ChatGPT to use that. But we can see where this train's going.
Yeah.
Soon enough, what's going to happen is ChatGPT is going to offer a public a place where you can purchase and sell these custom GPTs. And then eventually they'll also make them so that you can post them publicly outside of the paid ChatGPT 4 paid subscription. So we see where this is going, but right now they're just like, hey, you can go in, you can make one. If you want to make one open to the public so other people can use it, you can. But at this point, it's not the kind of thing where they're being sold, but that's coming soon enough.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. Thanks for enlightening us on that. And I'm assuming you'll keep your finger on the pulse of that so that when there are new developments, we can share them right here in the AI for Churches podcast. Hey, Google has also been in the news recently for some advancements in AI technology. Share a little bit with us about what's going on in the Google space.
Yeah. So Google has a generative AI platform called Bard, not Bart.
No,
Bard.
not Bart. No, yes. I have to explain to people. I am assuming that that's a reference to like William Shakespeare. The Bard, is that what it comes from? I don't know. William Shakespeare, the writer, that his nickname is the Bard, right? So when I heard Google's Bard, I think it's like Shakespeare. I don't know.
I like that answer.
Okay.
Let's go with that.
Okay.
So every generative AI platform has like an engine under the hood, the thing that makes it go. And Bard just got a much bigger, fancier, louder engine under the hood called Gemini. And in fact, that's where Google has launched their newest AI generative model called Gemini, which it kind of supercharges Bard. Up to this point, I've found Bard mostly useless compared to other platforms like Claude and ChatGPT. But recently, I was looking into like ideas for logo names, and what the Gemini powered Bard offered me was way better than ChatGPT. It was really interesting. It gave me such great ideas, very robust. It was the first time I've ever had Bard do something better than any of the other platforms.
Well, that's a hopeful sign. And you anticipate that Google is going to put tons and tons of money and energy into trying to keep up in this space. So that doesn't really surprise me. But that's pretty cool. Well, we'll play around with that a little bit more and see what we can learn. And one of the things that we want to do on every one of our episodes is just to highlight some tools that you and I have been using. And obviously, like, you're doing this all the time. I'm not. I'm dabbling in AI tools, a lot of times at the recommendation of you. In fact, I want to share a little bit of one that I've been trying out at your recommendation. We have a lot of our missional marketing internal team calls are on Zoom. And I don't know, a couple of months ago, you showed up with a friend in a Zoom call that said something like, David's AI note taker. And we all sat there and thought, well, this is kind of strange, but it doesn't really surprise us that David shows up with an AI note taker in a Zoom meeting. And I reached out to you recently and I said, hey, what was that thing that you were using? And you told me it's called TLDV, or TL:DV is actually the name. And so I checked this thing out. I've been having just a ton of meetings. And I'll be honest, I've had so many meetings the last couple of months. I've been struggling at keeping up with a lot of my to-dos that are coming out of those meetings, my actual action items. So I decided just in the last few days to start trying this TLDV platform, which basically shows up like as a person in your Zoom call, except it's not really a person. It's just like a little black box that says Bart's AI note taker, and it records the call. And it summarizes, it gives you, when you go into the account, it gives you like all of the highlights, the key points in the meeting. It shares who's talking and when they're talking. It gives you a list of action items and things of that nature. I haven't played around in it a ton, but here was a very practical thing that I did with it just a couple of evenings ago. On Tuesday evening, I had an elder board meeting with a church that I'm doing some work with. And, I was on the call for about 45 minutes and I used the TLDV to record the call, which automatically gives me a transcript. I took that transcript, copied it, threw it into Claude, and asked Claude to give me a summary of the meeting and all action items listed. And it was 98% accurate. There were a few things that I had to go back in and track. And so I was able to have this 45-minute phone call, have somebody basically recording the call, pulling notes out between the TLDV and Claude.ai. I was able to basically synthesize a summary of the message so that I could share it with the call so that I could share it with some of my other colleagues. And then I had a list of all of my action items coming out of it. This, to me, for my schedule, is going to be a game changer. And I started thinking, a lot of churches now are doing more board meetings or prayer meetings or things on Zoom. And I think this would be a great tool for churches to use as a supplement to just a human note taker, right? If you're having board meetings or team meetings or planning meetings, and if you do them with Zoom, I don't know if it would work with like Google Meet. I know a lot of churches will use Google Meet and some other platforms right there, but I know that for Zoom, so far, I've used it for about 4 or 5 meetings in the last few days, and I've found it to be really, really helpful. And I'm just now beginning to, kind of unpack all that TLDV can do. There's a free version of it, which is pretty limited. I discovered pretty quickly is pretty limited. I think the subscription is $25 a month or something of that nature. So I went ahead and I subscribed so that I could kind of access more of the tools and the features. And I'll keep working with that to see, what more I can do with it. But I thought it was pretty cool. What about you? But thanks for the tip, by the way. I don't know if it's the end all be all, and I'm sure that there are other competitors to it. But for me right now, TLDV is gonna save me some time for sure. So why don't you share with us some things that you've been working with?
Yeah, there's 2 I want to share just quickly. One is a company called Simplified, which is simplified.com. It's mainly a social media platform, and it's becoming more robust all the time. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is that they just added the ability to create snippets, which when you upload your a video, it'll automatically create snippets. I'm experimenting with it. So in our Facebook group, AI for Churches, I've asked people just, hey, share with me a few sermons so I can practice and see how well it does, and how does it stack up versus some of the big boys in the church space like Sermon Shots, Opus Clip, Munch, these other ones, and we'll see. But I just wanted to mention that briefly. If you're looking to experiment with something, you might look into Simplified. They're building more AI generation features like video, images, and text within their social media platform. And
okay.
the other one is called 12labs.io. Missional Marketing came to me with a problem and saying, hey, we want to look back at some of our other podcasts. Missional Marketing happens to have a podcast, which you are one of the hosts of. And we wanted to look back and say, let's think about some stuff that's in those podcasts. So I found this 12labs.io where you can upload videos and then ask questions about what is the text that what people say, words that are shown in the video, and things that are visually seen in the video. That it's called a multimodal platform where it's paying attention to all of the things happening in the video, visually, words in the video, and text. What I wanted it to do was pay attention to the audio, and it couldn't do what I wanted. So I got bored, and I started doing things like, can you give me any times that there's a bald person in the video? And it did a great job of finding every single time you were in the videos.
Thank you, David. Well, that's because I'm in most of the episodes. It's pretty easy. By default, there's a bald guy in every episode.
Yeah, it did a great job. So just so you know, yeah, if the generative AI does know that you are, I said balding, but I don't know how you classify yourself, but that's.
My son tells me I'm bald, so I'll just say bald there.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. 12labs.io. We'll link to all of these. Simplified, 12 Labs, TLDV. We'll link to all of this in the show notes. David, really cool conversation. If you happen to be new to the podcast, which there's a really good chance that you are because it's a relatively new podcast, and you haven't subscribed wherever you listen, make sure that you do that. And we would love feedback. If there's anything that you would like for us to dig into, why don't you send an email to D Thorne, that's DTHORNE at missionalmarketing.com, and tell David what you want us to do in this podcast. We want to do this for you, to make this useful for you as a church leader, as a pastor. By the way, if you are a pastor and you've never checked out the missional marketing AI tool that we've created, it's called Sermon Spark, sermonspark.ai. It is a growing platform with some tools to do some interlinear study and it's other stuff, lots of stuff that you can do in there. And if you haven't checked that out, make sure that you do. So David, you did an interview and you want to queue up this interview and then we'll listen to your conversation.
Yeah, we had an interview with Barbara Carneiro from the Word Revolution, and we are going to be talking about personas. Personas. Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks, David. Thanks for those of you listening. Here's David Thorne, Dr. David Thorne, and his interview with Barbara Carneiro.
Hi, everyone. This is David Thorne, and I'm here with Barbara Carneiro from Word Revolution. And thanks so much for being with us here today, Barbara.
Yeah, it's nice to be here.
Yeah. So what we like to do just to get started is I would just like to ask you, if you and I were on an elevator together and somebody said, "Hey, Barbara, what do you do? And who do you work for?" What is it you would tell me?
Yeah. So generally I say I'm a branding and communication specialist. If you want to ask me about the company, I have the lofty sentence, which is like, we love to review heartbeats, because there's a lot of exercises out there that will get you to that point of saying something fancy. But then people are like, what does that even mean? So, then we go into like, we basically do branding and communications. What's funny is that when you hear branding, you just think, oh, you just design logos. So anyway, we do a little bit deeper work than that. And so sometimes I'll go with the lofty answer and say, we reveal the heartbeats of the churches and organizations we work with. And sometimes we just say we're just a branding agency. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely, and definitely, figuring out how does things like technology and AI feed into where the world is going and understanding heartbeats of churches and, and marketing and branding and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, I want to ask you 5 hard-hitting questions about you.
Okay. Let's do it.
These are very important. Okay. So we'll start with number 1. Dogs or cats?
Okay, well, that's a tough one. My daughter just asked me yesterday, kitties or puppies? I was like, oh, that's a hard question. We have one of each. So for me, it's really hard. But oh God, I would probably say dogs. I think I would say dogs. Yeah.
I respect that.
Mine is right here.
I mean, it's tough if you like both. It's like saying which of your kids,
right?
You like. So I respect the complexity of that.
Yeah.
I also appreciate you choosing dogs.
Yeah.
Number 2, a favorite sports team.
That would be the Brazilian soccer team.
The national Brazilian soccer team?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
For sure.
Yeah, cool. It's a good one to cheer for.
Yeah.
A favorite AI tool.
I'm a big fan of Magi. That is the one that I use the most. There's a lot of new kids on the block and a lot of things I've been playing with. And I do believe there are a lot of very interesting tools out there. But when it comes with, as far as favorites, 100% Magi is my favorite.
And for people who may be listening or watching, what does Magi do in a nutshell?
It's a combination of a lot of AI tools. And so I think that's what I like the most, but it's always evolving as a tool. So you can have ChatGPT there and you have other language models as well. There's also images, and there's a big component that I absolutely love, which is creating the personas. We'll talk about that in detail later today. But I would say it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife of AI in a way. You kind of can find all in one spot, and that's why I love it. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. Next question is, can you name a movie that you like, or just that's, that you can think of, robots take over, and robots or AI or something that takes over or is a major part of the movie?
Yeah. Well, is everybody else saying Terminator? Because that's the only one that comes to my mind every single time I think of AI and robots taking over. And it was a very impactful movie back in its days, and so I don't know. It's still, and maybe it's just nostalgia of remembering, watching movies back then with this futuristic approach. But yeah, Terminator, I guess.
That's a great one. And I would say that actually is objectively one of my more favorite movies.
Yeah.
But not because of the robots taking over, obviously. But that's a very impactful one.
Yeah.
But of course, we do have our more benevolent ones, like I mentioned last week on our podcast, or on our last podcast. There's ones like Short Circuit, which are friendly robots, but it's a little bit older,
right?
So our younger audience listening to this will definitely have no idea what Short Circuit the movie is.
Yeah.
So, and I haven't watched it in a long time, so there's a chance it doesn't age well.
Right. That's true.
All right. So last question is, can you name a one task, personal or work, that you wish AI could do for you?
Oh, God. Accounting, 100%. But I'm saying do it like a human does it, for sure. That is by far the one task that makes me not want to be a business owner.
Yeah.
Ever.
That is,
accounting and taxes and all that kind of stuff. So.
Don't you love that there are people out there
that love it,
do enjoy it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, it's one of those things where you talk about the body of Christ, and that you're thankful that people, are different. I'm glad there are finance people out there.
Yeah, no, for sure. 100%. That is the one task I dread the most. Anything that has to do with books, accounting, and taxes. And I'm not even opposed to paying taxes. That's not even the issue. The issue is just putting together and understanding their requests and their documents. It's just overwhelming. So, kind of aligned with that. I'm assuming AI is already doing this. I never tried it, but, just reading contracts and explaining it in simple language. So I'm sure there's AI doing that already at this point.
Yeah. Oh, I that's something we might, for all of us listening, if you have any complex contracts, try entering them into Claude and ask Claude to summarize and simplify.
Yeah.
I bet Claude could do that right now.
Yeah. 100%.
Anyways, we may have just found it solved a problem.
Another problem
with AI.
Right.
So so tell me about and what you do with branding and helping people feel heartbeats across the world, in churches. Tell me about what tools you guys are exploring and how AI is impacting what you guys are doing at Word Revolution.
Yeah. So, I believe that there are others out there doing work that is far more fun than what I'm doing, creating images and things like that. But what's fascinating to me is the ability to do things faster that we would naturally do on our own. But let me bring you through some of the processes that we use to address branding for churches specifically. And so I believe there's two main components to branding, which are the same that you would have in communications. You have one person on one side and you have one person on the other side. So you have somebody communicating something and someone receiving that communication, right? So these two parts or parties are somewhat trying to establish a relationship, a connection. So when you think of churches, a church is one piece of that, and then you have the audience on the other side. I've always been a big advocate of know your audience, know your audience. I would raise that flag really high. Who's your audience? And I believe there's a lot of, I 100% believe there's a lot of value and power and understanding who you can serve well as a church. But then on the other hand, I think this is something that God has been, for the last maybe 3 years, focusing greatly on the identity of the church. So it's hey, the people on the other side matter, but the identity of the church matters too. Who this church is in the community. because there's a good chance there's different types of churches in your area. And like you said, there are people doing different things with different talents, just like the accountant, right? And so churches will fulfill different needs of the community, different key human desires and things like that. So anyway, this to say, where there's AI come in, I believe a big component of the identity of churches is to understand what is their archetype, like how are they portraying themselves. So from a branding standpoint, I don't think churches should all fall in the same category. I do believe there are churches that are more what we call teacher churches. We have churches that are more caregivers and servant churches. We have churches that are more leader churches. And so these categories, and I don't want to just put a label on churches, but I do believe that there's something that rises to the surface for each specific church. And so at this moment, the moment I'm able to identify, if I know, okay, my church is mostly focused as being a teacher church. I'll give you a great example. This one is easy to see. It's Tim Keller in New York, for example. Traditional teacher church. It's focused on the truth and teaching and getting others to understand truth and pass down that truth. Like you wouldn't expect a very charismatic expression of emotional worship at Tim Keller's church. Does that make them less of a church? No, they're just different, right? So if I know this is the archetype, the type of church that this is, then I can start communicating like it. And so one thing that we have done is we have categorized these 12 archetypes and using AI, start giving it characteristics. So we would say, hey, a teacher church is very wise. It's focused on teaching, on truth. It's focused on this. So we give instructions based on that archetype. So that's one piece. Then you have the other player. You have the audience, right? The people you're trying to serve. And, I like to humanize my audience because we think of audiences as like this, oh yeah, our audience. And audience is like this maskless face of people that you never really get to see. And I tell pastors all the time, I was like, we got to give them faces and names. We got to give them an age. We got to see who they are. We got to picture them sitting across the table from you. And so I know that sometimes branding agencies and, will be like, we're serving 33-year-olds that are, you know what I mean? Like there's this very specific, and I'm like, it's not that we're just reaching 33-year-olds as much as that is like, I want you to picture who's sitting across the table from you. So give this person a face, give them a story. Mm-hmm. And so now you have a humanized version of the church with a personality, and you have a humanized version of your audience with an actual story and a face and all that. So what we have done, and this is where AI comes in, is when I go to, and this is Magi, okay? I don't know if other tools do that. I know Magi does, and I absolutely love it. Mm-hmm. So when I go to Magi, I can talk to ChatGPT, I can talk to Claude, I can talk to other models. But they also allow us to, I don't know if you've seen that way. You can select a type of person that is speaking to you. You can say, hey, answer this question as a marketer, answer this question as a writer, and right? Well, what Magi allows me to do is to create that persona that I'm speaking to. So I'll go in and I'll say, okay, the person that we pictured sitting across the table from you is a 35-year-old single mom that lives in this zip code and does this and does that. Like we know that profile. So we go into the AI and we say, hey, this is the person I want to talk to. And from that moment on, that persona is created. And now when I go to when I go to Magi, I'm no longer talking to ChatGPT generically. I'm talking to Mary, right? So I'll go in and I'll say, okay, Mary, I am creating a VBS promotion. And I would love for you to tell me what kind of objections you would have to bringing your kids to VBS.
No, hey, Mary. I'm sorry, not
Barbara. Mary's Barbara.
Mary. You made her so real. I know.
So you see her in the room. See.
So, can you pause and let's pause and just. I think you've done it, but just even outside of your specific context.
Yeah.
For the person who's listening, when they hear the word persona, can you kind of explain that in like a broader context? Just of saying person who's I go to ChatGPT, I'm using it for the first time. And I have no idea what the word persona means.
Right. Actually, that's a good point, because when we think of Google search or search engine search versus engaging or utilizing AI, there's a difference in attitude. Like our whole mindset is different. So when I search, I'm simply hitting a database with a request that will then give me a response based on what's in the index. Here, it's a conversation. So when I'm engaging with AI, you have to see it as a conversation. And it's interesting, like it's not just a one request in isolation. You're going to see that it gets better and better the more that conversation evolves, and you can give it more details or ask deeper questions or say, you know what, this is not it. Like it would never occur to me to do a search in Google and be like, sorry, Google, this is not it. But when I'm engaging with AI, I would literally just say that. I said, that's not it. And I don't give AI any more details. I'm just saying this is not the direction I wanted to go, like I would to a person. So imagine if I'm sitting with an assistant and I say, hey, I need to do X, Y, and Z, and I need blah, 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 blah. Person brings me the result and I said, no, that wasn't it. I can give it more details if I want, but AI is so powerful in this sense that you can simply say that wasn't it, and it will go back. And by the way, it will even apologize to you, which is quite funny because I'm like, I wish Google apologized to me more often. Yeah. You know what I mean? So because the results that we get from a search is you need to see that as you simply searching an index versus having a conversation. Now, obviously, as a machine, we still have to remember that, but it's so humanized that sometimes, like you said, we forget and we think we're talking to Mary. And I, in fact, I want those conversations to be so real. And so
I definitely think that makes a good, that's a really important distinction you made, is saying that, when you ask Google, it's kind of a one-way street. You say, Google, give me an answer to this.
Yeah.
Where you said that when you engage with a generative AI system like Claude or ChatGPT, it's a conversation. It's a two-way street. And just saying that, taking that one step further is, you can't ask Google to give you an answer as if it were something. If I said, Google, I'm looking for a recipe, as if you were Gordon Ramsay, please give me responses to this, my recipe query. But and when you go to these generative AI systems, you can actually tell it to act as anything in the world. You could say, as professional chef Gordon Ramsay, how would you respond? What kind of postcard would you want to receive in order to make you want to come to our summer vacation Bible school? Which is crazy. What a crazy thing.
It really is.
And those generative AI systems are like, no problem. I can respond. I can tell you exactly what I think, what it thinks from what it's learned of what kind of VBS postcard Gordon Ramsay might most likely respond to.
Yeah. And it's funny you say Gordon Ramsay, because that's one of the first ones that I tried for fun. This is a fun one to try if you want to try. I ask AI to explain the difference between Republicans and Democrats as a poem written by Gordon Ramsay that would be understood by a 15-year-old. And this was something that I sent to my daughter. We had a blast reading it. It was like the funniest thing ever. I did ask it for it not to include any profanity because he's known for that. So, but it was an interesting experiment. The ability to compile and combine things that before would have taken you, the amount of talent and time it would require for you to do all of those things, right? So imagine this. So it's designed as a poem. So you need to be some sort of a writer in the tone of a famous chef celebrity, explaining political differences, but then at the same time being understood by a 15-year-old. And so the intricacies of all of this data is something that humans cannot execute at the speed that AI can do. And so now we have access to things at a faster pace. And so AI in many ways is not necessarily creating, it's just doing things at a pace that for a human would make like, wow, I would need maybe 4 people to get that done. And it would take us a whole, weekend brainstorming together.
Yeah. I love that example. And we'll have to like put that on like the show notes or something. Here's a practice prompt to try.
Yeah. That's a funny one. And definitely,
part of what I love about
use it.
What I even love about that example is it also kind of showcases all the parts of an ideal prompt, which is, you're asking it to answer as a persona. Mm-hmm. You're asking it to give you a certain type of response, a poem. Yeah. You're asking it to, how you wanted it to, like the output, you want it to be understood by a certain person. Yeah. Kind of giving like a tone. Yeah. And then you're giving it any kind of like negative parameters of things you don't want it to do, like please don't cuss.
Exactly.
But part of it is that's so helpful because people are listening. Like there are people who will be listening to this podcast and they're listening because they don't know what to do and where to start. Yeah. And you're using it every day through Magi of using it for your work, which is awesome. Yeah. And it's also helpful just for our listeners to understand. How do you even ask it a question? So,
yeah. So I think that's where the power of humanizing. I think AI has humanized our audiences in a way that we haven't done before. Because again, we've been sitting in our offices trying to think about what would they think, how would it, and let's be honest, we skip steps. We're like, I'm just going to write the email like I always do, right? You're not necessarily empathizing with that person or thinking about what would make sense for them. And so this is giving us a glimpse on the emotional landscape of the people that are speaking to us. Because if I say, hey, Mary, what objections would you have to bringing your children to VBS? It's something that I would not have access to unless I sit with a bunch of Marys in my area. And let's be honest, most people don't have the time to do that or the capacity or even the skill set many times, right? So now I have the ability to input the characteristics of the person. And I now have the ability to have conversations with her. And so when I'm talking to Mary, I'm picturing, and like you said, it makes it so real that sometimes we forget. It feels like I'm texting with a friend. That's how it feels. I'm texting with a friend. So it's like, okay, what would make you come to VBS? I know that you're not a believer. What would make you say, you know what? I'm willing to send my kid to VBS. Those questions, I don't think there are many churches out there that have ever asked those questions of their audience. Yeah. Ever.
Oh, I want to get to like how can we take that exact use case for pastors? But before I get that, I think one thing to help put a little bit more flesh on it is the idea of when you are going to tell that tell Magi, act as Mary. Yeah. Could you give me some like make it a little, what are the actual things you would say, like saying, Magi, your name is Mary.
Yeah.
You are, and then how deep do you go?
Oh, we go super deep. So what Magi allows you to do is you create the persona. So it's always there. You don't have to say it anymore. You just pull from a drop down. So now from that moment on, you're talking to Mary. Our list of characteristics is really, really high. So we go for things like obviously her age, her family status, her employment. We do the zip code she lives in, but we also go into the psychographics and we even tell a story. So we're talking like there's 1,000 lines of information that are being inputted before we even get started. Now that work is the work that any branding agency would generally do because they would be able to map out what we call your avatar or ideal client or ideal audience. And so that type of information normally comes into I've seen it done in 2 ways. So you have the traditional, okay, she's 35, she's a soccer mom and that kind of stuff. But we take it a step deeper into mapping out the emotional landscape of that person. So we'll say things like, okay, this is what she dreams about. This is what she thinks. This is what she says when she comes home after work. Mm-hmm. And then we go a third level, which is literally creating a story. Okay. One day in her life looks like this. One day in her life at work looks like this. And so AI knows all of that. Now, obviously there's a little bit of stereotypical approach here because you're grabbing information from one person that you created in your mind. And you have to remember that this is not something that says to churches, okay, from now on, only if they match this profile, we're going to speak to them. That is not what it means. And that's not why we do these exercises. However, now you have the ability to speak to one person that represents a group of people that come to your church. And you can do that for another group, and another group, and another group. So we have Mary as a representation of, let's say, the millennials, single moms, millennial single moms in your area. I would say there's some things that we can kind of extrapolate from one individual to others in the area. And so you can utilize that to have these conversations. Listen, our inputs are really long. I'm thinking it's probably about 500 lines of input for each archetype. And again,
to note about that for people listening is just understanding that these generative AI systems can understand huge amounts of information. Exactly. So now, for a church pastor or leader, listening to this, we don't have to be overwhelmed by that, because, we're not going to sit down at a computer and input 500 lines of code to create a persona.
Yeah.
That's what we can get you guys to do for us.
Yeah. And, you can start with 10 or 20. We were just talking about dogs. Here's mine. We can talk. You can start with 20 lines. So it doesn't have to be this, because we have the info, you can add it. But imagine if you could simply start talking to somebody that it has, 5 things about them. That is better than the secretary that comes with ChatGPT, right? Or the administrative, because now you're giving a little bit more of that landscape, like the profile of the individual that actually lives across the street from your church. So don't feel like 500 is the number to reach, as much as it is like the more information you have. And here's the cool part: you can go into Magi and you can start adding more characteristics to that person as you have them. Yeah.
Now, so and that's where it's forming in my mind how this is applicable to a pastor. So, if you were going to explain how a pastor could use this, like just saying in their week, or a church leader, the worship pastor, the outreach pastor, this concept of using personas, telling the generative AI, this is who you are. Asking it questions. How could this be helpful to what a church leader or pastor does in their week?
So just picture your sermon creation just naturally, right? So you might be asking yourself questions about how are people going to perceive this, or what kind of needs are there in my community that would align with what I'm preaching this coming Sunday, or just in your sermon prep alone. What would it mean to you if you could have somebody come to your office and you just ask them questions? What would it mean for you to have somebody just think about outside of the walls of your church? So that person is sitting there, and I would even give AI the instruction to say, you can start with this: atheist in this zip code and this age. That's it. Give these 3 inputs and say, I want to talk to somebody who is an atheist in this zip code, and it's 47. Mm-hmm. And now I'm talking about this. I'm thinking about this sermon. I'm preparing this sermon, and what would I ask if the person was sitting in my office? What would I ask them? What kind of conversations would I have? Because there's a good chance that when you're preparing your messages, you're already thinking about people. Mm-hmm. Now you get to ask the question, and I believe that you will get insights that you may not be aware of. I'm not saying that it might change the way you preach. It might change your sermon series. I think it might change the way you see people. Mm-hmm. That is the most valuable piece.
What's coming to my mind is, like, there are some churches that have like a written out standard way that they introduced offering or talk about
100%
baptism, or talk about communion. And it's one of those, like, at the church I used to work at, we basically had it was written out, right. I basically had it memorized. Like, this is what I said.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me wonder what would happen if I uploaded that phrase, that statement, and I said, if you were acting as Mary, or a 47-year-old single male in our zip code.
Yeah.
What would you respond to this this language?
Yeah.
Is there anything that's confusing? Is there
Exactly.
anything that would make you feel uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Is there anything that, just how would you respond to that? I have no idea what it would say.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because you also have, when I was talking initially about the personality of the church, you're going to find that these scripts that we see and hear often have just been circulating between different churches too. And so you're sounding like the church next door, but yet your behavior different than the church next door. So imagine if you could go in and say, hey, act like this particular type of archetype for the church, speaking to Mary, and rephrase this text. And what you're going to see is that some things will become significantly simpler in the way that you're communicating. You just don't realize it anymore because we've said it so many times. It's memorized. It's like the Lord's Prayer. Like you just say it without even thinking about what you're saying, right? Just repeat it. I'll give you one example. We were talking about a signage for the outside of a church. And the archetype of this one is what we would call a friend church. A friend church is probably the most common. It's like the guy next door. It's that person that's just like makes you feel like you have a community. And so many churches have this particular type of archetype and the simplicity of the message, right? And so we had this signage outside. And we're like, well, we need to redesign it. We need to do something different with that signage. And the initial thought is like, okay, put up, the times we meet and the URL. And we start thinking about like, okay, but how would this particular archetype speaking to this particular person, what would make sense to them? And that kind of question, it's interesting how once you start engaging with AI in a more conversational tone, it is fascinating to me how those conversations now start to shift to in person. Because now I'm talking to other team members. I'm like, what would Mary say? And I'm like, Mary's not even real. She's a persona I created in Magi. And now we're talking to each other as if Mary's a person. Yeah. And we ended up building the sign that instead of saying the traditional, hey, we meet on Sundays at such and such time, we now have a sign that says Jesus really is good. And so when you drive by, it says Jesus. Why? It's a friend archetype for the church reaching out to I think it was like a 33-year-old millennial male. And so imagine like the idea of just simply thinking, wow, Jesus really is good. It's a simple language. It's not very, it's not out of the ordinary. It's a super simple. It's something a friend would say to you. You know what I mean? But we caught ourselves having almost like AI conversations in real life with each other, now imagining these things that before we wouldn't consider, so it's bringing back to reality as well, what we're doing with a robot. Anyways.
What I love about this, Barbara, is that it's something every church leader can do. Like if you have access 100%. To ChatGPT or Claude, any church leader can just open it up and say, like you said, very simple. Here's 3 things you are going to act as ... And then a key takeaway I'm taking away from what you're saying is basically the use of this can apply to every single thing you do as a church.
Every ministry.
From thinking about where you put signs, what you write on the signs, how you convey things you do as a church, your outreach.
Yeah.
Anything you do, if you begin, it's like putting yourself in somebody else's shoes.
100%.
You aren't.
Yeah.
And saying, how would you respond? What do you care about? What are you confused about? What kind of language should I use? And oh man, like every single church needs to do this more.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it would be revolutionary if you start thinking about the conversations that you can have with something that is representing the people outside of your church walls. And, sometimes it's easy for us to get insight from the inside because you can ask people already coming. But what happens when you're trying to promote VBS to an atheist around the corner? Those are the people that we're trying to reach. And so, what's interesting is that the answer surprised me a lot. And funny enough, we've heard this before, that there's a lot of non-believers that would attend church if people would just invite them. And interestingly enough, AI gave me the exact same answers. Yeah,
that's very cool.
That an invitation would make them go.
Yeah.
So it solidifies so many things. You know what I mean?
Well, I really appreciated your insight, and I think that it's really going to be helpful for church leaders and pastors listening to this who are just learning about the concept of personas for the first time and how it can be practically useful to their everyday ministry.
Yeah.
But before we go, just can you tell me a little bit about, if a person was listening to this, and who does Word Revolution typically work with, and if somebody was interested in connecting with you on how should they reach out?
So we serve churches that are normally in some sort of transition. They're trying to figure out who they are, what their message is, where they're going, not necessarily from a leadership standpoint as much as it is like, how do we communicate who we are? So sometimes there's this confusion about who they are as a church, what message they're putting out. And we do a very deep work of discovery, of really capturing, like, okay, what's the heartbeat of your church? Like what makes you you? Because at times, even dying churches, like if numbers wise, you find yourself what normally would be called a dying church, I believe they all have a divine design. And if we can capture it and see, okay, what is in there? Hey, here's what I see. Bring it up to the surface. I believe that there would be great power when churches can live out unapologetically who they are. And so from a branding standpoint, we come in, try to reveal what's there, and then try to communicate what's there to the outside. So wordrevolution.com, it's not world. Some people think it's world revolution. I would love to start a world revolution, but it's word. So like the word of God. So wordrevolution.com, and Barbara at wordrevolution.com is my email. I'm also very active on Facebook. We have a group for accidental church communicators. So it's easy to find me there as well.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Barbara. It's been a great chat. And I think this call and this chat is going to be really helpful to a lot of churches. So thanks so much for chatting with me.
Thank you for having me.